extractive industry, a very important issue right now, also for Mexico and for New Zealand. And I am going to present our first speaker, Glenn Blanks. He's going to present discordant development, mining and development in the Pacific. Glenn Blanks' research focused on the socioeconomic and cultural dimension of large-scale private sector investment in the extractive industry in Papua New Guinea. And this research is framed by theoretical concerns with development, local empowerment. He is currently conducting collaborative research which critically examines private sector claims of corporate social responsibility in the tourism and resource extraction sectors based on case studies in Fiji and Papua New Guinea. And this research connects with applied contract research and consultancy for institutional and private sectors, actors in the extractive sectors in the region. Okay, Glenn, please, you have the floor. I will close my microphone.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Yes, good evening, good morning, and apologies again. I don't know what's happening with my video settings on this computer. I'm shifting computers a little and it seems to have just failed me. So you're fortunate though, you don't have to look at my face. It's probably the upside of the situation. This morning, my time, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the work I've been doing for the last more than 30 years now, in mostly in Papua New Guinea, but also in other parts of the Pacific. Now, here we go. The mining industry is one that globally has been increasingly regarded as a sector which generates conflict. And in this presentation, I'll briefly introduce you to some of the examples of mining in the Pacific, and particularly the work I've been doing for some time in Papua New Guinea, to explore some of the factors that sit behind the conflicts in the Pacific. And I'm interested to know and compare the situation that I'm describing with what's happening in Latin America, and particularly in the case of Mexico. The focus of my argument today is more on the distributional elements of these conflicts. So the ways in which particularly the revenue streams, but also the costs are distributed among different actors. And looking at the way in which they're shaped by colonial and contemporary regimes of governance that really play into creating the sorts of conflicts that we see on the ground these days. A large part of that is to do with the inequality that is very much a function of the sector in the region. And I'll finish up, take it forward really, and talk about some of the ways in which what the future might hold in terms of mining in the region. So firstly, a little bit of background on the sector in the Pacific, and particularly Papua New Guinea. Then briefly introduce three very high-profile mining conflicts from, again, within the region, within Papua New Guinea, and then drill down to look at some of the distributional aspects of mining conflicts in the region. And as I say, finish up by talking a little bit about future mining in the Pacific on land, but also increasingly there's interest in offshore mining, on deep sea mining, and what some of the implications of that might be. In terms of mining in the Pacific, its origins really date back to the colonial period, certainly in terms of the large-scale mining that we see today. There are a number of economies, New Caledonia, Papua New Guinea, and Fiji, which have been dominated since the beginning of the colonial period by large-scale mining. And one of the very obvious factors that flows from this colonial history are the very profound implications for the present. In terms of the legislative regimes, there's still ordinances in the mining acts in Fiji and in Papua New Guinea, which are directly tied to the colonial period in both those respective countries. And certainly in the case of New Caledonia, it's still regarded largely as a colony of France. And so that those colonial implications really flow through into the way in which legislation and regulation is framed. Alongside that, you have the institutional forms that govern the mining sector in the region. And again, these are very closely tied to the institutional forms that were established during the colonial period. I think too, there's a very strong sense in which the national imaginary of what, as a nation, Papua New Guinea is, what Fiji is, and particularly what New Caledonia is shaped dramatically by that colonial history of mining. So Papua New Guinea is regarded very much, as we'll see in a minute, very much as a resource-dependent economy, and that's very much the way in which it is formed and talked about in terms of national identity. And everything from the nature of environmental regulation down to labour laws and the way in which they impact on the continuing relationship between expatriate and local forms of labour within the sector are all directly tied back to this colonial period. And certainly the regimes and structures of accumulation that are attached to the mining sector are ones that were grounded in that colonial past and persist in many forms through to the present. One of the key things and one of the key striking aspects of mining in the Pacific is the relationship between the state and the local community, the local citizens. And particularly this comes through in terms of land ownership. And so in places like Papua New Guinea, 97% of the land is still held under customary forms of land tenure. And that's quite distinct from most other parts of the world. And it has a profound influence on the way in which mining corporations are able to operate. They have to negotiate with local communities. The state must negotiate with local communities to be able to access land for mineral development. A very brief and directed bit of introduction to mining in Papua New Guinea. If you include the natural gas sector as alongside the hard rock minerals, then almost 90% of Papua New Guinea's exports are derived from the extractive sector. It dominates contributions to GDP, and at different points in time, it's been absolutely central to government revenue. So we're talking about a formal economy which is very closely tied into the extractive sector. And this has pretty profound implications. I list out three particular forms of enclave, if you like. Very much a material enclave, the classic form of an enclave economy that is established around these large operations. The infrastructural and technological dimensions and its environmental impact, the footprint that it establishes on the ground. There's also too an institutional enclave. There's a protection and support given to the institutions that support the extractive sector, which is quite distinct from many of the other institutional forms across government and governance within Papua New Guinea. And finally, as I noted before, there's very much an ideological enclave. So that the place of mining and of landowners in the national imaginary is absolutely critical. And so there's an ideological marking of mining as very much about face-to-face relational encounters between corporations and communities. One of the things that drives, and I'll come back to later, is a very much a strategic absence of the state from these encounters between communities and multinational mining corporations. To give you a brief sense of the geography, I'm a geographer by background, so I have to have a map in every presentation I give, just about. This shows the existing and future mining prospects in Papua New Guinea. The ones that I would highlight are at the top right, we have the Lihir gold mine. Way over on the far left of the image, we have the Octeti copper gold mine. A little bit to the right of that, the Porgera gold mine. Those are the three big existing gold mines. There's also the Ramu nickel cobalt mine. and a number of the other prospects. The most controversial of the prospects, or the closest to getting going currently, is the Wafi prospect, again, a very large-scale mine. And in the top left, the Frida project, which is causing some controversy right now for reasons that we could touch on in the Q&A. So a very wide spread of operations across the country. And what this map doesn't show is the exploration tenant leases across the country, which cover about 2/3 of the country, exploring for additional mineral resources. And it doesn't show the oil and gas sector as well, which dominates the bottom half, the bottom left-hand half of the diagram, of the map at least. So mining and development in Papua New Guinea, it is development and discord. It's brought wealth for a significant number of actors within the country, but it's also brought a huge amount of conflict. There have been literally tens of billions of kina, the local form of currency in Papua New Guinea, tens of billions of dollars, literally, extracted. Around 15% of that has been retained by the PNG state. It comes and goes year by year. Somewhere up to 25 to 35% is retained by local suppliers, local contractors, local employees. So it stays within the country. It feeds the economy in that way. And the rest goes to offshore suppliers, to expatriate employees, to investors. The return for investors in some projects at some points in time has been very high. At other points in time, it's been a sinkhole. They've lost money on some of these large-scale projects. At the national level, it's underpinned economic growth and development in Papua New Guinea from independence, from 1975 onwards. And I'll mention the mine that started it all there. Another key factor is since 1975, there's been an incremental increase in state ownership within the sector. So you now have some of the very large-scale mines, like the Octeti copper gold mine, entirely owned by Papua New Guinea interests, largely state interests, and some of that state interest is held on behalf of communities and provincial governments. And the legacy and intergenerational aspects of the mining industry are absolutely critical. The environmental legacies, the social and the developmental legacies. So for all of the contributions that they've made, all of the impact of the sector on Papua New Guinea, it's barely moved the Human Development Index, for example. Over the last 40 years, that Human Development Index and Papua New Guinea's ranking globally has not shifted, despite the resources that the country has. Moving on to talk specifically about conflict. There's, as I say, one of the key aspects of this is that contemporary conflict in Papua New Guinea around mining conceals the accumulation in some parts of society. Some groups within society have done very well. And one of those groups that I'll come back to a little later are the landowners. The identified owners of bits of land that have been developed by mining companies have done very well out of that. It's also exposed the weakness and fragility of the state very, very clearly. Only select elements of the state appear to work quite effectively in terms of the mining sector. One of them is security, and that's an element in the conflict we'll talk about. The state ability to collect revenue from the corporations themselves has also worked quite well. A lot of other aspects of the state have been far less effective. And the structural power held by individuals and institutions of governance within and outside the state have been influential in maintaining the presence of the sector, and in part that inequality that's been generated by that has fed conflict very, very largely. Three examples of large-scale mines that I'll touch on very briefly. The first is the Bougainville copper mine, which was established prior to independence and formed the basis for post-independence, the post-independence economy. By the late 1980s, it had generated so much conflict, the environmental concerns that were being generated, and a process that an anthropologist, Colin Feiler, identified as social disintegration within these local indigenous communities. And a lot of that social disintegration was actually driven by the distribution, the unequal distribution of benefits from the mine. It's not that the mine didn't generate benefits for communities, but the impact of the distribution, the unequal distribution of those, was critical to the conflict that ensued. Sparked a civil war, so Bougainville declared itself independent from the rest of Papua New Guinea and generated the most deadly conflict in the Pacific since World War II. Somewhere between 10 and 25,000 people are believed to have died as a direct or indirect result of this conflict. It's finally slowly working itself out, but as you can imagine, the long-term legacy of that conflict remains. So a complex set of factors sit behind this particular conflict, including intergenerational equity within these communities and a very deep sense of grievance towards the Papua New Guinea state as a whole by people on Bougainville. The other side of the country, completely the opposite side of the country, in the 1980s, you had a large-scale copper gold mine called the Octeti mine start up. And again, this made international headlines in the 1990s. It was the first large post-independence project. It became a national project, but it became very apparent from the early 1990s that the environmental impact of this, which you can see in the imagery, were massive and were impacting on communities downstream, which had very little access to any of the benefits from that particular operation. So there were some lawsuits taken out by local communities downstream against the operator, an Australian mining corporation, BHP, and after 2 years of legal wrangling, it was settled out of court in 1996. On paper, a very large settlement. However, despite that settlement, the environmental effects continue, and there are multiple conflicts and debates around legal suits and everything else around the way in which the revenue streams from that operation are divided up between the impacted communities, the state, local landowners, and so on. And the third operation I want to talk about is one where I have the longest connection to. I first went there in 1992, soon after it became established. And it's the PUEAA gold mine right in the middle of the highlands of Papua New Guinea. It's one of the world's, in 1992, it was the third largest gold producer in the world. So it's a very large gold mine in global terms. It's generated a range of conflicts on environmental, human rights and distributional issues. The human rights abuses over the last decade, from about 2004 onwards for about 10 years, were central to the way in which PUEAA was viewed externally. And it was linked very clearly into some of the corporate and state security actors around the mine and abuses against local women in particular, but the local community generally. There's also very deeply ingrained distributional inequities generated by the PUEAA gold mine between the local identified landowners and other people around the mine, between migrants who have moved into the area and the other communities in and around the area. The population's gone from about 2,500 to something over 50,000 in the area, all manner of conflicts generated. And there's been, most recently, some really tense negotiations between the state and the corporation which operates it, which is part Chinese, part Canadian, with a little bit of local ownership as well. And here's just a picture of, this was about 10, 12 years ago, front page news in Papua New Guinea, illegal miners attacked the PUEAA mine. And that's not uncommon. You'd get 2 or 3 incidents of that kind of level each year, at least. So what are some of the common themes to head towards the end here? At their core, these local and national level conflicts are primarily distributional in nature. Even though the environmental impact of these mines is pretty huge, it varies from mine to mine, but the Octeti mine is just almost mind-boggling, the scale of the impact of that operation. But rather than the environmental issues themselves being at the core of generating the conflict, it's really about the distributional elements of the benefits as well as the costs that have generated these conflicts. Melanesia and the Pacific generally is a series of societies which are regarded very much as relational type societies. That is, they are, individual identity is constructed relationally rather than a set of individual people operating quite independent from each other. So relations between groups, between individuals, between insiders, outside parties, between people and the environment are all framed very much relationally. And that has a huge impact on the way in which the distribution of benefits from these mines is understood locally. So conflicts are really about the resource, about the minerals, or about the environment per se, but they're about distribution of benefits and costs in that relational worldview. So to head very much towards the end, in terms of what this means for the sector going forward, all of this, the colonial history, the current, the post-independence regimes of development, of benefit distribution, of governance, all have implications for thinking through in terms of the future. So there's a lot of, I indicated some of the new mines in Papua New Guinea, but there's new mines being proposed in Fiji and Solomon Islands, and redevelopment of prospects in New Caledonia as well. The focus tends to be, particularly from the outside, on the environmental effects of these mines and the impacts on communities and the environment. But I think there's a danger, if we focus on that, of obscuring the need for the importance of these distributional concerns when it comes to the large-scale mining operations. And the final factor I would throw into the mix are the prospects for deep sea mining in the region. This is a map that shows, a second map in my presentation, a map that shows the distribution of deep sea mining tenements held by one company. Interestingly enough, this was in 2010. This company last year went into receivership. So these tenements are kind of up for grabs now, and highly, highly contested. Some of the most interesting ones are the ones that sit offshore New Zealand. They haven't actually secured, they put in an application for them, but they did not secure them. In other parts of the Pacific and the Cook Islands, for example, there has been a number of attempts to secure investors because the government is keen to develop some of these deep sea mining tenements. And the first operation in the world was supposed to be in Papua New Guinea, the Saltwater project, but again, that was one of Nautilus's projects, and it's on hold currently because the company's gone into receivership. Just to give you a sense of the scale, that was one small part of the Pacific. This was a map that was generated about 5-6 years ago of known deep sea mineral deposits across the Pacific, globally, across the world's oceans. And you can see the Pacific is very much a target. And if you like, it's one way of drawing a link. There's a nice line you can trace directly from New Zealand through to Mexico in terms of the location of these deep sea mining prospects. So I think it's something that will feature, perhaps not in the next 10 years, but certainly for future generations, accessing and developing these deep sea minerals. Final slide, very much a large-scale mining. If you've ever stood on the edge of one of these large-scale mines, they are enormous. They are just mind-blowing in terms of the scale. One of them a couple of them in Papua New Guinea, for example, move 500,000 tons of material every day. And just the sheer scale of that is something that we don't often appreciate. They sit within pre-existing social, political, and cultural realms. And I think they're perhaps less a site of conflict and more about a process of transformation, one element of which is conflict. And conflict connects to a range of other processes in all sorts of ways, about distribution, about impact, and so on. And these transformations extend over decades and generations. The environmental transformations, as I say, are huge and profound, but it's the connected, I think, distributional contests that really drive conflict in these relational societies across the Pacific. And a large part of that is the persistence of social, cultural tropes that sit alongside novel forms of introduced economy, inequality, and relationships. So taken together, then, incredibly complicated scenes And I think if we frame them simply as conflicts over environmental transformation, then we're missing a large element of what is actually sitting underneath these conflicts in the Pacific. So I will leave it there and hand back to Alicia.
Thank you, Glenn. It has been very interesting, this extractive industry. I'm not going to make the comments to your paper because we are just on time, and I will present Letizia Silva. She is architect by the Autonomous University of San Luis Potosí, master in urban studies with a specialty in environment from El Colegio de Mexico. She is doctor in geography with honorable mention from UNAM, postdoctoral researcher at a postgraduate degree in rural development at the Autonomous Metropolitan University Xochimilco and at the Geography Institute of UNAM. In both, she focused on the closure and abandonment of mining sites, and at UNAM, she collaborated in the integration of the Atlas of Mining in Mexico in the Closure and Abandonment chapter. Her main lines of research are landscape and industrial mining heritage, social and environment impact of mega projects, closure and abandonment in mining sites. She is currently Deputy Director of Projects for Sustainable Development at the Environmental Secretariat. She was the winner of the scholarship from the Mexican Academy of Science, the Advisory Council of Science for Women in the Social Science in 2018. For her research work on mine closure, she is member of the Crisis and World Economy and Rural Development Working Groups in Claxo, as well as member of the Association for Rural Studies. Letizia, I give the floor and welcome to this great program.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if it seems. Can you see it? Okay. So I want to talk about some findings that I have had in my research, which dates back about 15 years ago. It's about mining sites, like Alicia just said, but I'm focused on the cease of their mining activities, how the population survives, and what actions governments and the companies take in this regard. So first of all, I want to show you the map of Mexico. It is colored by regions, and I have been concentrating my research in north of the country, the blue ones and the red ones mainly. So because I'm going to focus just on the mega mining of gold and silver metals and copper extraction. So we have here, this map is the mining concessions in the country. If you want to explore this kind of mining, you have to ask for a concession. Is just the colored by the color blue is already given to companies to do mining activities, any kind of mining activities. And I have to clarify that mining in Mexico does not include the extraction of gas or hydrocarbons. It's just minerals ore, and it is not for construction kind of materials. It's just another kind of minerals. So I want to be clear also that mining activity comprehends all the process. It's just not the phase that is the extraction of the ore. It is also the exploration and the alternatives processes that helps to take the main exploitation activity. So like the mineral cleaning or the crushing or the leach. So the importance of this image is that in Mexico, the mining activity is priority. So this means that if in the land is another development like forestry or agriculture, farming, those will be rejected in order to preserve mining activities. By now, in our days, we have almost 30% of the territory is concessioned for mining activities, but we don't have a legislation about mining closure or a normative that is established in a law that helps to know what to do with the abandonment mining sites. So I was focused on these mining stories about behind the abandonment. The mining issue is very wide. So my main concern, it has been what happens behind the abandonment of the mining activities. When it stops, it maybe can be temporary, or maybe this is permanent. So the first of all is what's a mining cycle and what happens in Latin America, including Mexico. I have to say that we have no restriction. Next. This is the mining cycle. Is prospecting, development, extraction, processing, closure, remediation. It's a mining cycle in all the world. And what happens in Latin America and in Mexico is this phase of extractivism, the sacrifice zones that we have to put for the development of the country with the mining cases, the deterritorialization, increase in mining, I can't see this, increase in mining projects, and mega mining. Mega mining includes these cases like the other conference say about the open pit mines and the large mining sites. So, but these are, sorry, I can't, sorry. Yeah. Extraction, this mining cycle includes extraction of non-renewable resources, and it has limited amount of ore, and it depends on international prices. So it's going to be interrupted in eventually. So this could be temporary or permanent, and it happens that we have no regulation about this. So we have this kind of extractivism and sacrifice zones, etc., because we don't have enough regulation to know what to do in this interruption phase that is not in the law. We have total uncertainty and no productivity in the area. And it happens to be a naturalization of this possession and no possibilities for other developments. And we have no chances to decide on their territory. The population has no alternative, because a lot of these places are very like an enclave, and we don't have another kind of economical way to live in. So we don't have a registration in Mexico of a closure mine. We don't have information that says how many projects are closing, but we have a term very, very particular that the name is postergation or suspension. And this is all the years since 2013 to 2018 that says we are increasing projects, total projects, but we are increasing also this postergation phase that is almost, more than 30% of all the total projects that are in postergation, and is increasing. All of that projects are interrupted. We don't know if it's temporary, like a week, a month, a year, or maybe 20 years. And it's we don't know if that's how to regulate this, to know if they are doing another kind of activities, to know what's going to happen with the population when with no work, and what happens with the environment, because a lot of these disposal are open to And we are not capable to know what is going to happen if they are not closing, because it's just an interruption. So just to take the difference about the mine closure and the mine abandonment or relinquishment, mine closure is works or activities that concentrate strategies aimed to counteracting the post-operational effects of the mining activity in a comprehensive manner, contemplating environmental and social actions. And in relinquishment or abandonment, those there are a lot of mine closure kinds, and I have been working on the vocabulary terms about what kind of words are more reliable to link with the mining closure in Mexico case. This is not an official or legal vocabulary. There are just terms I adjust to what I saw in some specific cases about mining closure or mining relinquishment. We need to think to legislate about it. It is necessary, but it's just one of the vocabulary I am working on. These are the kinds of mine closure: temporary, permanent, partial, and we have the sanction is because you are it's an obligation for the law to be a closure or a suspension, and also we have the actors in this closure mines, the governments at the 3 levels in Mexico. We have the local population that is affected, direct or indirect, stakeholder and experts, also the academics, organizations, and companies. And the problematic which is taking place in these areas are migration, lack of work, environmental damage, fragmented social networks, health, dependence, and eventually abandonment. These are some of the work I have done in past years. Is about what happens when the mine ends, when it stops the mining activity. We have, in one hand, mining sites closure, and in other hand, mining sites abandonment. One hand is the mining sites closure. We have what policies are taking about mining closure nowadays, and how are they planning, and how what kind of methodologies take in these cases. And the mining sites abandonment, there are historical mining sites, and they have environmental passives. I don't know if this is the correct translation, but is marking in the place because they don't have any restoration work. So we have in the right side, very ancient town, Pilares, in Sonora, the north of Mexico, and they just the company just left the place with all the environmental passives, and they did not no restoration work, and the town is almost it's almost a ghost town. This is Pilares, and we have a lot of passives, environmental passives. Abandonment, forced migration, because they don't have another way to live in the place, and toxic disposal. This is Álamo Dorado, the north too, in Sonora. And we have a mining closure here to take care about for the company, but anyways, we have social exclusion because the population has not involved with this planning, and they have a lot of uncertainty about labor and survival, almost because now this is a place very near to the narco, and they don't have any alternative to work. This is Real de Ángeles, Zacatecas, in the north and center north of Mexico. We have here forced migration, uncertainty, labor, pollution, abandonment, and this is a case that is this postergation, this suspension of the activity, mining activity, is almost about 20 years of suspension, and they don't have any kind of work, and not just for the population. They don't have labor, but also they don't have works, the company, about what are they going to do with the pollution. This is maybe the most famous methodology disclosed among mining companies is the International Council of Mining and Metals. And they offer a toolkit for closing. And it says what closes in this process is the mining process, and the relationship with the town and the environment. They offer a conceptual closure planning methodologies and detailed closure planning with graphics of participation of actors and decision makers. This is the graphic that explains, by one side, the mine life cycle, and the other side, how it is going to happen to be a conceptual closure planning, and how the stakeholders take place in all the phases of the mine life cycle. If you can see, this planning is not a month or a year after they are planning to have a closure. It happens, it is planning since the exploration phase. So this is a graphic that represents how to use the toolkit, and in the right side are the companies that are members of this council. Theoretically, all of these companies are taking care of all of their mine developments in all around the world with this methodology, and we have to know if they are doing this. And for the finally, I have to say normalization is the first obstacle for directing a policy about closure of the mining sites. The migration, the generation of poverty, and the marginality are not normal. The processes by the towns are abandoned, should be reviewed. From the establishment of the mega mining model to date, even with the new environmental regulations and new forms of civil participation, closure planning rests with the goodwill of mining companies in Mexico case, and maybe in other countries also. And final considerations, mine closure planning is not limited to the sum of rehabilitation or restoration actions and environmental management techniques. It is an integral and social planning beyond the mining sites, also within a basin, aquifers, areas of influence, etc. It is vitally important to establish glossaries of terms and definitions regulated and stipulated in laws, more vocabularies that help us to comprehend all the problem inside of the abandonment and the closure. Identifying types of closure helps to bring us closer to transparent actions and responsibilities of stakeholders. Abandonment is not an inescapable condition of mining. It is not linked to its activity of mining activity, and it is also abandoned. Progress should be made in curricula that contemplate new approaches to mine closure, particularly towards a comprehensive vision of closure with another kinds of disciplines like geography, sociology, psychology. And we have to avoid the continuation of ghost mining towns. And we have to focus on the autonomy of the territories. The population has to decide what to do with this, their territory. Thank you very much, and I am here to listen to any questions.
Thank you, Letizia. Very interesting paper about Mexico. I would like to make a comment because this extractive industry has taken, in my opinion, I'm not specialized in mining, but as I have seen, it has been taken a lot of development during the last 3 decades. I don't know if this is because especially demanding from China all these minerals, or sometimes also the importance of the mining corporations. I was just wondering, who are the owners of the mines in Mexico, Letizia? Do you have especially the names of the corporations? Who are the principal investors in Mexico, and also in New Zealand? Who are the owners? Who are the corporations that are working? Because it is not a corporation maybe from Chile. No. There are big corporations that are around the world, and maybe we have to declare a declaration to regulate these mining corporations. But I'm not a specialist of that, but I would like if you have the names, or who are the principal institutional investors that are in this in the mining industry, even in New Zealand and in Mexico. Please, Glenn, if you would like to have a comment or...
Yeah, thank you. And I've managed to get my video working, so it looks like I'm talking to you from a mountaintop somewhere, but I wish I was, but I'm not. Two quite different answers. One from the New Zealand setting, where we have two large-scale, medium-scale gold mines and a coal mining industry. Certainly the gold mines are owned by a smallish international corporation called Oceania Gold. They're based in Australia, but they've got interests in the Philippines and New Zealand. They've opened a new mine recently in the US. So they're small scale, very much committed to notions of sustainability and so on. And it's very interesting listening to the work that's being done on mine closure planning in Mexico, because I know that I've recently had some contact with Oceania Gold here in New Zealand, and mine closure planning is absolutely central to the stage that they're currently at here with their New Zealand operations. In the Pacific, though, it's quite a different picture. We're seeing a sector that used to be dominated by Australian and Canadian corporations. So Barrick Gold was on the list of ICMM companies. They are still 50 or 45% shareholders, I think, in the Porgera gold mine. They have interests in other parts of the Pacific as well. The Chinese investors are starting to gain a bit of a foothold. They have a significant share in the Porgera gold mine. They also own outright one of the big nickel cobalt mines in the region. We're seeing investment from other countries too. So one of the big mines in New Caledonia I think they're looking at getting out, but owned by Vale, the big Brazilian mining company. So we're seeing Brazilian mining investment into places like New Caledonia. We're also seeing, and I made mention of this in my presentation, increasing national ownership in places like Papua New Guinea. And it's starting to happen in New Caledonia too, where you're starting to get local companies and state-supported companies owning a significant share of these corporations. I don't know. I'd be very interested to hear what the situation is in Mexico too.
Thank you, Glenn. Letizia, please.
I think, I expect that I can explain myself because my English is not very good. But the most important investors in mining here in Mexico are Canadian companies, and they have almost the 70% of the investment of mining, and it is very focused on the gold and silver mines. But we have to look very well that in Mexico there are a lot of mining sites and mining projects. There are in the hands of richest man in the world is like Frisco Group is the owner of Frisco Group is Carlos Slim, and the other person that is one of the richest men in the world is Bayeres and Larrea, and they are the owners of the Peñoles and Grupo México. And they have not just very large mining sites in Mexico, they have also larger mines and developments in other parts of the world, and very large parts, and they have a very, very earnings about these projects. So you said, Alicia, that we have to do maybe a better regulation about this kind of mining. We have now in this presidential time that they are not going to make more to give more concessions. It is stopped now because in the past it has a lot of concessions that are given and more territory for the development of this mining. That is good because we are not taking more land for the mining, but we have to look what are they doing, the actual developments, not just prevent which are getting more land to the mining development. We have to look what are they doing, and I am focused and I am very concerned about what happened with these places that which are not doing anything because maybe it's not profitable, they don't have enough money to invest, and they stop doing things, and the environment gets compromised and the population gets compromised, and we don't know what they're going to do. So it's not just the future mining, it's also the current mining activities. We have to look what to do, and maybe the legislation is regulated in the environmental law and in mining law, but we are very aware we have to do a lot of more modifications to be more capable to watch what they are doing.
Thank you, Letizia. I would like to continue talking because as I see the mining also in Latin America, it's incredible how the Chinese investment is in the mining in Bolivia and in Peru. And even they have bought a mine in Bolivia, even with Evo Morales. So that's what it's surprising how a led government sold a mine. And the problem is, I think it is not only giving more concessions. I don't think that is a problem. Even the private Mexican investment or foreign investment, that it doesn't matter. The problem is that the Mexican state or other states aren't strong to regulate the mining process. And the problem is not only the pollution, the danger to the environment. The problem is that most of the gold and the silver, they just take without you don't give an add value to those mining. And you don't have the control of the production. So the production, you export the production, and when it comes, and then you are buying that production already manufactured. So I think that the problem is very big, and the damage, and also how the people, the miners, all these little towns of miners, how they are living. I don't know if it is the same situation in New Zealand, but if you go to Zacatecas and if you go to those places where are the mines, the poor people, poverty is increasing. and it is increasing, and with a managed in the families and all that, and also to the health of the minors. So that this is, I think that that's why I am thinking that maybe a good regulation and a good regulation for these companies, but the impact in the environment and the impact in the social life of the people that work in the mines. So I think we have a lot to talk. Glenn, I don't know if you want to add, we're just on time. If you want to add a comment, please, Glenn.
Just one comment. You're absolutely right in terms of the relative weakness of states in the Pacific compared to the large corporations. And there's a group of us who have been working with the South Pacific Commission, SPC, or Pacific Community, to try and develop a regional approach to these rather than the corporations, and particularly in relation to the deep sea mining aspects. Try and develop a regional coalition that allows them to present a more united front in terms of the regulation of the sector, because otherwise the corporations can come and land in one small island in the Pacific, negotiate from a position of real power with limited resources on the ground for the government to actually push back and negotiate fair terms around environmental protection, around revenue sharing, and so on. So a much more regional approach is being promoted in the Pacific to trying to redress some of those power imbalances that exist. Here in New Zealand, I don't think it's such a problem. We don't tend to have the large corporations, and the state is relatively strong when it comes to regulation of the sector, of the environmental impacts, and so on. So that's not an issue. I think much more so in the Pacific is where we're starting to see with these deep sea minerals some real issues around governance and equity and so on.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Letizia, would you like to say something in 1 minute?
Just one thing, priority in our law is a very incomprehensive aspect, because we can't see how the population of the local sites are taking the real. We cannot see the distribution, local distribution of the wealth. So the law that established that we have to see the mining issue like a priority is a very contradiction thing in our law. Mining is a priority in a comparison with agriculture or a forestry is not taking a really good place in our law. Just I wanted to add that, and that will be all.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We are closing today at most 5:30